A war elephant is an elephant that is trained and guided by humans for combat. The war elephant's main use was to charge the enemy, breaking the ranks and instilling terror. Elephantry are military units with elephant-mounted troops. They were first employed in India, the practice spreading out across Southeast Asia and westwards into the Mediterranean. Their most famous use in the West was by the Greek king Pyrrhus of Epirus and insignificant numbers by the armies of Carthage, including briefly by Hannibal. In the Mediterranean, improved tactics reduced the value of the elephant in battle, while their availability in the wild also decreased. In the East, where supplies of animals were greater and the terrain ideal, it was the advent of the cannon that finally concluded the use of the combat elephant at the end of the 19th century, thereafter restricting the use to engineering and labor roles. Taming. The first elephant species to be tamed was the Asian elephant, for use in agriculture. Elephant taming, not full domestication, as they are still captured in the wild, rather than being bred in captivity, may have begun in any of three different places. The oldest evidence comes from the Indus Valley Civilization, around roughly 4500 BC. Archaeological evidence for the presence of wild elephants in the Yellow River Valley during the Shang dynasty of China may suggest that they also used elephants in warfare. The wild elephant populations of Mesopotamia and China declined quickly because of deforestation and human population growth. By c. 850 BC the Mesopotamian elephants were extinct, and by c. 500 BC the Chinese elephants were seriously reduced in numbers and limited to areas well south of the Yellow River. Capturing elephants from the wild remained a difficult task, but a necessary one given the difficulties of breeding in captivity and the long time required for an elephant to reach sufficient maturity to engage in battle. It is commonly thought that all war elephants were male because of males' greater aggression, but it is rather because a female elephant in battle will run from a male. Therefore only males could be used in war, whereas female elephants were more commonly used for logistics. Antiquity. India, Persia, and Alexander the Great. There is uncertainty as to when elephant warfare first began. The earliest Indian Vedic hymns, the Rig Veda, dating from the late 2nd and early 1st millennia BC, make reference to the use of elephants for transport, especially Indra and his divine white elephant, Airavata, but make no reference to the use of elephants in war, focusing instead on Indra's role in leading horse cavalry. The later stories of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, dating from around the 4th century BC, however mention elephant warfare, suggesting its introduction during the intervening period. The ancient Indian kings certainly valued the elephant in war, some stating that an army without elephants is as despicable as a forest without a lion, a kingdom without a king, or as valor unaided by weapons. From India, military thinking on the use of war elephants spread westwards to the Persian Empire, where they were used in several campaigns and in turn came to influence the campaigns of Alexander the Great. The first confrontation between Europeans and the Persian war elephants occurred at the Alexander's Battle of Gaugamela, where the Persians deployed 15 elephants. These elephants were placed at the center of the Persian line and made such an impression on the Macedonian troops that Alexander felt the need to sacrifice to the god of fear the night before the battle, but according to some sources the elephants ultimately failed to deploy in the final battle owing to a long march the day before. Alexander won resoundingly at Gaugamela, but was deeply impressed by the enemy elephants and took these first 15 into his own army, adding to the number during his capture of the rest of Persia. By the time Alexander reached the borders of India 5 years later, he had a substantial number of elephants under his own command. When it came to defeating Porus, who ruled in the Punjab region of modern-day Pakistan, Alexander found himself facing a considerable force of between 85 and 100 war elephants at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. Preferring stealth and mobility to sheer force, Alexander maneuvered and engaged with just his infantry and cavalry, ultimately defeating Porus's forces, including his elephant corps, albeit at some cost. Porus, for his part, placed his elephants individually, at long intervals from each other, a short distance in front of his main infantry line, in order to scare off Macedonian cavalry attacks and aid his own infantry in the struggle against the phalanx. The elephants caused much losses, with their tusks fitted with iron spikes, by lifting the enemies with the trunks and trampling them. Arrian described the subsequent fight. Whenever the beasts could wheel around, they rushed forth against the ranks of infantry and demolished the phalanx of the Macedonians. Dense as it was, the Macedonians adopted the standard ancient tactic of fighting elephants, loosening the ranks to allow the elephants to pass through and assailing them with javelins as they tried to wheel around. They managed to pierce the unarmored elephants' legs. The panicked and wounded elephants turned on the Indians themselves. The Mahouts were armed with poisoned rods to kill the beasts, but were slain by javelins and archers. Looking further east again, however, Alexander could see that the kings of the Nanda Empire and Gangaridae could deploy between 3,000 and 6,000 war elephants. Such a force was many times larger than the number employed by the Persians and Greeks, which discouraged Alexander's small band of men and effectively halted their advance into India. On his return, Alexander established a force of elephants to guard his palace at Babylon, and created the post of Elephantarch to lead his elephant units. The successful military use of elephants spread further. The successes to Alexander's empire, the Diadochi, used hundreds of Indian elephants in the wars, with the Seleucid Empire being particularly notable for the use of the animals, still being largely brought from India. Indeed, the Seleucid-Mauryan War of 305–303 BC ended with the Seleucids ceding vast eastern territories in exchange for 500 war elephants, a small part of the Maurya forces, which included up to 9,000 elephants by some accounts. The Seleucids put the new elephants to good use at the Battle of Ipsus 4 years later, where they blocked the return of the victorious Antigonid cavalry, allowing the latter's phalanx to be isolated and defeated. Later in its history, the Seleucid Empire used elephants in its efforts to crush the Maccabean revolt in Judea. The elephants were terrifying to the lighter-armed Jewish warriors, and the youngest of the Hasmonean brothers, Eleazar Maccabeus, famously defeated one of the creatures in the Battle of Beth Zechariah. Sticking a spear under the belly of an elephant he mistakenly believed to be carrying Seleucid King Antiochus V, killing the elephant at the cost of Eleazar's own life. The first use of war elephants in Europe was made in 318 BC by Polyperchon, one of Alexander's generals, when he besieged Megalopolis during the wars of the Diadochi. He used 60 elephants brought from Asia with the Mahouts. A veteran of Alexander's army, named Damis, helped the besieged megalopolitans to defend themselves against the elephants, and eventually Polyperchon was defeated. Those elephants were subsequently taken by Cassander and transported, partly by sea, to other battlefields in Greece. It is assumed that Cassander constructed the first elephant transport sea vessels. Some of the elephants died of starvation in 316 BC in the besieged city of Pydna. Others of Polyperchon's elephants were used in various parts of Greece by Cassander. The Mediterranean, the Ptolemies and the Carthaginians began acquiring African elephants for the same purpose, as did the Numidians and the Kushites. The animal used was the North African forest elephant, which would become extinct from overexploitation. These animals were smaller, harder harder to tame and could not swim deep rivers compared to the Asian elephants used by the Seleucids on the east of the Mediterranean region, particularly those from Syria, which stood 2.5 to 3.5 meters at the shoulder. It is likely that at least some Syrian elephants were traded abroad. The favorite, and perhaps last surviving elephant of Hannibal's 218 BC crossing of the Alps was an impressive animal named Cyrus, and may have been of Syrian stock, though the evidence remains ambiguous. Since the late 1940s, a strand of scholarship has argued that the African forest elephants used by Numidian, Ptolemaic and Punic armies did not carry howdahs or turrets in combat, perhaps owing to the physical weakness of the species. Some allusions to turrets in ancient literature are certainly anachronistic, a poetic convention, but other references are less easily discounted. There is explicit contemporary testimony that the army of Juba of Numidia included turreted elephants in 46 BC. This is confirmed by the image of a turreted African elephant used on the coinage of Juba II. This also appears to be the case with Ptolemaic armies. Polybius reports that at the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC the elephants of Ptolemy IV carried turrets. These beasts were significantly smaller than the Asian elephants fielded by the Seleucids and so presumably African forest elephants. There is also evidence that Carthaginian war elephants were furnished with turrets and howdahs in certain military contexts. Farther south, tribes would have had access to the African savanna elephant, although much larger than either the African forest elephant or the Asian elephant. These proved difficult to tame for war purposes and were not used extensively. Some Asian elephants were traded westwards to the Mediterranean markets. Pliny the Elder stated that the Sri Lankan elephants, for example, were larger, fiercer and better for war than local elephants. This superiority, as well as the proximity of the supply to seaports, made Sri Lanka's elephants a lucrative trading commodity. Although the use of war elephants in the Mediterranean is most famously associated with the wars between Carthage and Rome, the introduction of war elephants was primarily the result of the Greek kingdom of Epirus. King Pyrrhus of Epirus brought 20 elephants to attack the Romans at the Battle of Heraclea in 280 BC, leaving some 50 additional animals on loan from Pharaoh Ptolemy II on the mainland. The Romans were unprepared for fighting elephants, and the Epirot forces routed the Romans. The next year, the Epirots again deployed a similar force of elephants, attacking the Romans at the Battle of Asculum. This time the Romans came prepared with flammable weapons and anti-elephant devices. These were ox-drawn wagons, equipped with long spikes to wound the elephants, pots of fire to scare them, and accompanying screaming troops who would hurl javelins at the elephants to drive them away. A final charge of Epirot elephants won the day again, but this time Pyrrhus had suffered very heavy casualties, a Pyrrhic victory. Perhaps inspired by these victories, Carthage developed its own use of war elephants and deployed them extensively during the First and Second Punic Wars. The performance of the Carthaginian elephant gore was rather mixed, illustrating the need of proper tactics to take advantage of the elephant's strength and cover its weaknesses. At Addis in 255 BC, the Carthaginian elephants were ineffective due to the terrain, while at the Battle of Panormus in 251 BC the Romans' fleets were able to terrify the Carthaginian elephants being used unsupported, which fled from the field. At the Battle of Tunis, however, the charge of the Carthaginian elephants helped to disorder the legions, allowing the Carthaginian Macedonian phalanx to stand fast and defeat the Romans. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal famously led an army of war elephants across the Alps, although unfortunately many of them perished in the harsh conditions. The surviving elephants were successfully used in the Battle of Trebia, where they panicked the Roman cavalry and Gallic allies. The Romans eventually developed effective anti-elephant tactics, leading to Hannibal's defeat at his final Battle of Zama in 202 BC. His elephant charge, unlike the one at the Battle of Tunis, was ineffective because the disciplined Roman maniples simply made way for them to pass. Rome brought back many elephants at the end of the Punic Wars, and used them in its campaigns for many years afterwards. The conquest of Greece saw many battles in which the Romans deployed war elephants, including the invasion of Macedonia in 199 BC, the Battle of Cynoscephalae 197 BC, the Battle of Thermopylae, and the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC, during which Antiochus III's 54 elephants took on the Roman force of 16. In later years the Romans deployed 22 elephants at Pydna in 168 BC. The role of the elephant force at Cynoscephalae was particularly decisive, as the quick charge shattered the unformed Macedonian left wing, allowing the Romans to encircle and destroy the victorious Macedonian right. A similar event also transpired at Pydna. The Romans' successful use of war elephants against the Macedonians might be considered ironic, given that it was Pyrrhus who first taught them the military potential of these beasts. They also featured throughout the Roman campaign against the Celtiberians in Hispania and against the Gauls. Famously, the Romans used a war elephant in the invasion of Britain, one ancient writer recording that Caesar had one large elephant, which was equipped with armor and carried archers and slingers in its tower. When this unknown creature entered the river, the Britons and the horses fled and the Roman army crossed over, although he may have confused this incident with the use of a similar war elephant in Claudius's final conquest of Britain. At least one elephantine skeleton with flint weapons that has been found in England was initially misidentified as these elephants, but later dating proved it to be a mammoth skeleton from the Stone Age. By the time of Claudius, however, such animals were being used by the Romans in single numbers only. The last significant use of war elephants in the Mediterranean was against the Romans at the Battle of Thapsus, 46 BC, where Julius Caesar armed his 5th legion with axes and commanded his legionaries to strike at the elephant's legs. The legion withstood the charge, and the elephant became its symbol. Thapsus was the last significant use of elephants in the West. The remainder of the elephants seem to have been thrown into panic by Caesar's archers and slingers. The Parthian dynasty of Persia occasionally used war elephants in the battles against the Roman Empire, but elephants were of substantial importance in the army of the subsequent Sassanid dynasty. The Sassanids employed the animals in many of the campaigns against the Western enemies. One of the most memorable engagements was the Battle of Vartanants in 451 AD, at which the Sassanid elephants terrified the Armenians. Another example is the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah of 636 AD, in which a unit of 33 elephants was used, albeit less successfully, against the invading Arab forces. The Sassanid Elephant Corps held primacy amongst the Sassanid cavalry forces and was recruited from India. The Elephant Corps was under a special chief known as the Zend-Harpe, or Commander of the Indians, either because the animals came from the country, or because they were managed by natives of Hindustan. The Sassanid Elephant Corps was never on the same scale as others further east, however, and after the fall of the Sassanid Empire the use of war elephants died out in the region. the Far East. In China, the use of war elephants was relatively rare compared to other locations. Their earliest recorded use took place as late as 554 AD when the Western Wei deployed two armored war elephants from Lingyuan in battle, guided by Malay slaves, and equipped with wooden towers and swords fastened onto the trunks. The elephants were turned away by archers' arrows. The Han dynasty of the 2nd century BC fought against Nanyang Yu kingdoms of Southeast Asia that did employ war elephants. Common tactics used to repel these elephants included mass crossbow or artillery fire, and digging pits or trenches filled with spikes. By comparison, neighboring states significantly embraced the use of war elephants. Sri Lankan history records indicate elephants were used as mounts for kings leading the men in the battlefield, with individual mounts being recorded in history. The elephant Kandila was King Datughanu's mountain Mahapumbata, Big Rock, the mount of King Elara during the historic encounter on the battlefield in 200 BC. For example, in what is now modern-day Vietnam, in 602 AD the Champan army employed war elephants against the invading Sui Chinese army. The Sui troops led the elephants into a trap of falling into deep pits dug by them, also making extensive use of crossbows. Middle Ages. In Islamic history there is a significant event known as the Year of the Elephant, approximately equating to 570 AD. At that time Abraha, the Christian ruler of Yemen, marched upon the Kaaba, intending to demolish it. He had a large army, which included one or more elephants. However, the elephant, whose name was Mahmud, is said to have stopped at the boundary around Mecca, and refused to enter, which was taken by both the Meccans and the Yemenite foes as a serious omen. According to Islamic tradition, it was in this year that Muhammad was born. In the Middle Ages, elephants were seldom used in Europe. Charlemagne took his one elephant, Abul Abbas, when he went to fight the Danes in 804, and the Crusades gave Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II the opportunity to capture an elephant in the Holy Land, the same animal later being used in the capture of Cremona in 1214. But the use of these individual animals was more symbolic than practical, especially when contrasting food and water consumption of elephants in foreign lands and the harsh conditions of the Crusades. Farther east, elephants continued to be used in warfare. In India, the Chola dynasty and the Western Chalukya Empire maintained a large number of war elephants in the 11th and 12th century. The war elephants of the Chola dynasty carried on the backs fighting towers which were filled with soldiers who shoot arrows at long range. The Mongols faced war elephants in Khorasan, Burma, Vietnam and India throughout the 13th century. Despite their unsuccessful campaigns in Vietnam and India, the Mongols defeated the war elephants outside Samarkand by using catapults and mangonels, and in Burma by showering arrows from the famous composite bow. Genghis and Kublai both retained captured elephants as part of their entourage. Another Central Asian invader, Timur, faced similar challenges a century later. In 1398, Timur's army faced more than 100 Indian elephants in battle and almost lost because of the fear they caused amongst his troops. Historical accounts say that the Timurids ultimately won by employing an ingenious strategy. Timur tied flaming straw to the back of his camels before the charge. The smoke made the camels run forward, scaring the elephants, who crushed their own troops in their efforts to retreat. Another account of the campaign reports that Timur used oversized caltrops to halt the elephants' charge. Later, the Timurid leader used the captured animals against the Ottoman Empire. King Rajasinghe I laid siege to the Portuguese fort at Colombo, Sri Lanka, in 1558 with an army containing 2,200 elephants, used for logistics and siege work. The Sri Lankans had continued the proud traditions in capturing and training elephants from ancient times. The officer in charge of the royal stables, including the capture of elephants, was called the Gajanayaki Nilame, while the post of Kuru Velekam controlled the Kurua or elephant men. The training of war elephants was the duty of the Kurua clan, who came under their own Mahandiram, a Sri Lankan administrative post. In the Southeast Asia, the powerful Khmer Empire had come to regional dominance by the 9th century AD, drawing heavily on the use of war elephants. Uniquely, the Khmer military deployed double crossbows on the top of their elephants. With the collapse of Khmer power in the 15th century, the successor region powers of Burma and Siam also adopted the widespread use of war elephants. In many battles of the period, it was the practice for leaders to fight each other personally on elephants. One famous battle occurred when the Burmese army attacked Siam's kingdom of Ayutthaya. The war was concluded when the Burmese crown prince Mingyi Swa was killed by Siamese king Naresuan in personal combat on elephant in 1593. In Thailand, the king, a general, rode on the elephant's neck and carried Ngaw, a long pole with a saber at the end, plus a metal hook for controlling the elephant. Sitting behind him on a howdah was a signaller who signaled by waving of a pair of peacock feathers. Above the signaller was the chatras, consisting of progressively stacked circular canopies, the number signifying the rank of the rider. Finally, behind the signaller on the elephant's back, was the steerer, who steered via a long pole. The steerer may have also carried a short musket and a sword. Farther north, the Chinese continued to reject the use of war elephants throughout the period, with the notable exception of the Southern Han during the 10th century AD, the only nation on Chinese soil ever to maintain a line of elephants as a regular part of its army. This anomaly in Chinese warfare is explained by the geographical proximity and close cultural links of the Southern Han to Southeast Asia. The military officer who commanded these elephants was given the title Legate Adjutant and Adjutant of the gigantic elephants. Each elephant supported a wooden tower that could allegedly hold 10 or more men. For a brief time, war elephants played a vital role in Southern Han victories such as the invasion of Chu in 948 AD, but the Southern Han Elephant Corps were ultimately soundly defeated at Shao in 971 AD, decimated by crossbow fire from troops of the Song dynasty. As one academic has put it, thereafter this exotic introduction into Chinese culture passed out of history, and the tactical habits of the North prevail. Quote, however, as late as the Ming dynasty in as far north as Beijing, there were still records of elephants being used in Chinese warfare, namely in 1449, where a Vietnamese contingent of war elephants helped the Ming dynasty defend the city from the Mongols.